And so as the plot progresses, the god Asherah helps Kirta find a wife. Remember, he lost his first wife, and now he's found another. So Kirta makes a vow to Asherah. If Asherah would help him find a wife, he makes a vow to make certain sacrifices and so on. But Kirta forgets his vow. Asherah becomes very angry and exacts vengeance against Kirta. And El, remember the El being the sort of the supreme god, comes to Kirta's assistance. And at the end of the tablet, Kirta's son Yasib rebels against his father Kirta. And I wanted to read an excerpt. This is sort of the end of the epic of Kirta, and Kirta's son Yasib is confronting his father on his character and on the life that Kirta has led. And I want you to listen to this. And as I'm reading this out, and maybe as you're reading it on the screen, think about maybe some parallels as Yasib confronts his father, some parallels with the Hebrew scriptures, particularly Deuteronomy. So here we go. Hear now, O noble Kirta, hearken and alert your ear. In time of attack you take flight, and you lie low in the mountains. You've let your hand fall to vice. You don't pursue the widow's case. You don't take up the wretched's claim. You don't expel the poor's oppressor. You don't feed the orphan who faces you, nor the widow who stands at your back. And so you'll notice, particularly the second half of that excerpt, how similarly this reads to the law which is given to Moses in the book of Deuteronomy about guarding the rights of the poor and the widow and standing up for the claim or the claims of people who are being oppressed. So, we make a mistake if we think that these values were unique only to the people of Israel and to the Hebrew scriptures. We see here that there's a Canaanite culture, which, of course, God regularly condemns the Canaanite cultures for their immorality. And yet we see here in a Canaanite mythology that some of the same values which are espoused in the Hebrew scriptures are also being put forth and promoted in the Canaanite cultures which lived around Israel. Now, as many scholars have noted, the tale of Kirta has strong parallels with the tale of Job as found in the Old Testament. And here are some of the similarities, some of the parallels. First, we have divine help coming from the gods. In the Hebrew scriptures, of course, Yahweh, at the end of the story of Job, comes down and advises Job, and we see Job's fortunes being restored. But we see much the same thing in Kirta, with Baal and El coming to a man's assistance. Second, we have an accuser in both stories. In the book of Job, of course, the accuser being Satan. And in Kirta, we have the god Asherah accusing Kirta of forgetting his vows. Third, both God or Yahweh and Baal emerge from the clouds. In Job, you'll see that God emerges from the clouds. The Baal is actually one of his other names is the Cloud Rider, or he who descends from the clouds. So a very close parallel there. And number four, there's a lesson of divine providence, that basically it is outside of the realm of humanity to comprehend or understand the motivations of the gods or of Father God. And finally, we have this idea of the divine council. In the Hebrew scriptures, we have Yahweh, we have Father God, but we also have Satan, who almost seems to be working for God in a sense. We have, in certain places in the Hebrew scriptures, we have Yahweh sort of overseeing angelic beings, and Satan being one of these personalities. Even though this personality, we're told, did eventually rebel. Well, the Canaanite pantheon is built very much around this idea of a divine council, which is headed by the god El. So another parallel there. So the second Canaanite story that I'd like to put forth is what's called the Baal cycle. And this was put on tablets over a period of many years, probably from 1450 to around 1350 BC. And from Ugarit, we have 6 tablets. which tell three different stories about the god Baal. The overarching theme, though, of these tablets, the Baal cycle, is we see Baal struggling to establish his dominance over the universe. Tablets 1 and 2, Baal is introduced as the storm god, as the Lord, and he struggles against another god who is named Yam. Yam in many Semitic languages means sea. So we see Baal, the god of the clouds, fighting against Yam, who is the god of the sea. Tablets 3 and 4, we see Baal obtaining his palace or his home, and this is considered to be the crowning achievement of his godhood. And then the final two tablets that we have, we see Baal in a fight with another god called Mot. And again, in many Semitic cultures, the name Mot translates as death. So Mot was sort of the god of the underworld in the Canaanite pantheon. Altogether, we're introduced to four different gods in the Baal cycle, and each have sort of their own separate area of authority. Baal is the god of the storm. He's the weather god. He's the lord of the skies. Yam is the god of the sea. Mot, the god of death, the god of the underworld. And then we have another god called Ashtar, who's sort of the astral god, the god of the stars and so forth. Now, here's something about Baal. In contrast to Yahweh, Baal is not all powerful. He is not the only God. He does not possess all power over all of creation, as we're told that Yahweh does in the Hebrew scriptures. Rather, Baal has strong ties with the rain, with the fertility of the fields, and the weather, but that's sort of where his authority lies. He's limited in his power, and he seems to very much rely on the help of the other gods in the story, and he relies very heavily on El in the divine council. So this idea of the divine council of gods, which again is headed by El, this reappears in the Hebrew Bible, often in prophetic visions. If you look in Zechariah chapter 3, you'll see sort of this same idea or an echo of this Semitic Canaanite idea or concept. So there are scholars out there, people who sort of study these things for a living, who have argued that the God of Israel, Yahweh Elohim, or Father God, is really just an evolution or an assimilation of El's characteristics. And some people have said that Yahweh is really nothing more than El repackaged. There are others, of course, that would argue that the god El, who is the head of the divine council in Canaanite Ugaritic religion, he was really just an imperfect concept of the true God, Yahweh, particularly since he doesn't seem to possess the totality of divine characteristics. El is the head of the council, but he doesn't possess all of the power of the pantheon. El is very limited in what he can and can't do. One scholar is named Simon Parker, and he edited a volume in 1997 called Ugaritic Narrative Poetry. And I want to read this quote to you. He says, "Several renderings of deities and literary features of the West Semitic milieu reflected in the Baal cycle passed into ancient Israelite culture and then into later Jewish and Christian tradition. The message of peace on Christmas night, the heavenly banquet, and depiction of God as Father, the beast of Revelation, and many other features familiar from the New Testament and rabbinic literature stem from a long history that includes the Baal cycle. The closing chapters of Revelation provide a glimpse of the future that recalls the three major themes of the Baal cycle: Baal's defeat of Yam, or the sea, the building of Baal's heavenly place, and his conflict with Mot, or death. Revelation chapter 21 mentions the death of sea, the descent of the heavenly city, akin to Baal's palace, and the final destruction of death. In sum, the early forms of many formative religious concepts of Western civilization may be found in the Baal cycle." And he raises a number of interesting points, particularly when you compare some of the elements which he mentions, which are found in the Baal cycle with, like he suggests, the book of Revelation in chapter 21. And we see a lot of similarities between some of the things that Baal the aspects of his life and the fights the things that he is able to overcome, death and the sea and all these things. And then you look in the Hebrew Scriptures or in the New Testament, Revelation, and you see some of these same themes being repeated. So it's very tempting to almost overdraw these comparisons, and we have to be very careful. We have to be very cautious, though, when we compare Canaanite literature with the Hebrew Scriptures. There are obviously some common threads that pervade through Semitic literature and through Semitic religion, but we shouldn't necessarily take that in itself to mean that the Hebrew belief simply evolved out of Canaanite belief. I want to point out another tablet to you. This tablet has come to be known as El's Divine Feast. And basically, what happens in this story is that the god El throws a giant party for the other gods. And basically, all the gods get trashed, okay? And El gets so drunk that he has to have two lesser gods walk him home. And when he's home, he drops dead from a drunken stupor and basically falls into his own urine and excrement. Lines 20 to 22, it says, El slips in his dung and his urine. El collapses like one dead. El like those who descend to earth. And so the natural question, of course, comes to mind, well, does this sound like the God of the Hebrew Scriptures? Does this sound like Father God or Yahweh Elohim? And of course, the answer is no. So we have to be, we have to be very careful when we draw these comparisons and contrasts between the God that we know, the God that we worship in the Old and New Testaments, and the behavior of some of these Canaanite gods. They may share some common characteristics, but obviously there's quite a few differences as well.